commentator. Martin, thank you very much for your time. Let me start with the very first question that everyone's been debating for the last 2 days now. That is that Strauss-Kahn was the guy who was building the consensus, pushing the rescues at the IMF. Will that entire process be impacted? And I know I say this even though a Portugal bailout was in fact passed by the EU finance ministers meeting last night, where there was an IMF representative present.
Yes, I think the answer is that the bailout that has been agreed for, the bailouts have already that have been agreed, and that was true for the one for Portugal, are going ahead, will go ahead. They're already in process, in fact, basically completed. The question arises with the next round of bailouts. It is generally understood that there is going to have to be another package for Greece, and that will be a politically very controversial package, because there are many people in the Eurozone and Europe more broadly who feel that they have been cheated, in the sense that originally it was expected that Greece could go back to the markets in 2012. That now looks inconceivable, so it's going to need more money. There's also lots of evidence. It's clear that Greece is not sticking to its program, so this is all going to be very, very contentious and difficult, and I think for that sort of negotiation and subsequent negotiations of that kind, the absence of Strauss-Kahn could be quite significant.
Martin, how will this resolve itself, at least in the short term? For instance, what if Spain needs rescuing a lot sooner than any of us anticipated over the course of the next few months while he's still absent?
Well, the assumption at the moment is that Spain will not need a bailout package. That would create enormous problems because of the scale of the country. It's not quite clear that they have the resources necessary. That's a controversial question to deal with Spain. So if that were to happen, it would blow everything apart, and they would really have to start rethinking in a very, very big way. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But even just dealing with Greece will be a significant issue. It's going to require probably quite a bit more money. I suspect they'll put it up. It may not be too difficult to do this, but certainly it will be that bit more difficult to reach agreement without the catalytic role of the IMF under Strauss-Kahn, and nobody else at the IMF can play that role. That they don't have the same political weight within Europe.
Then the good news is that more EU leaders, including Angela Merkel, are opposed to a debt restructuring of Greece. So even if, like you say, the catalytic effect of Strauss-Kahn is sorely missed in the next few months, it at least won't come down to a debt restructuring, right?
Yes, but the alternative to a debt restructuring, of course, is to put a lot of public money up and allow the private sector essentially to withdraw its funding. That's going to be also difficult and politically very controversial.
All right, Martin, let me move to the second big issue that I wanted to speak to you about this evening, and that is that will the events of the last 2 days force an early departure for Dominique Strauss-Kahn, whose term otherwise comes to an end in 2012? And thus, will it open the door for possibly a power shift at the IMF, with the next leader coming from, say, a BRIC country versus the tradition of a European leader heading the fund?
Well, to take the two questions in order, it was in fact widely expected that Dominique Strauss-Kahn would leave in any case, because he was expected to stand for the presidency of France. So in that sense, this is sooner, obviously, and in very different circumstances, tragically different circumstances, but he was not expected to stay for the full term in any case. Then this is not a forecast about when he might leave. I really have no sense of how this this criminal procedure will go. Now, on the question of whether the next head of the IMF will be from a non-European country, that will be the big change, whether BRIC or non-BRIC. This is obviously a matter that has been discussed. There was an expectation that this was quite likely to happen this time. My own guess, and it is only a guess at this stage, I haven't heard from anybody, is that given how central the IMF has come to be in Europe, and given the enormous shareholding of the Europeans in the IMF, they're going to resist very, very strongly having somebody in charge of the IMF who's not European. And I suspect, though I can't be sure of this, that the Americans are quite likely to support them, in which case it will continue to be European. But this is really all up for grabs and for negotiation. My guess at the moment is that the next head of the IMF will in fact be another European, but if they don't come up with a credible candidate and others do come up with more credible candidates, then that could prove to be wrong.
And maybe the resistance will be a lot higher at a time like this in Europe, Martin. So I take that point, but would you say the chances then are slim that the next leader is Chinese, for instance? Because China has contributed significant resources to the IMF in recent years in exchange for more voting power that will be due to China this year and next. And in fact, yesterday we had a comment from the Chinese government spokesperson quite quickly saying that you also raised the issue of the selection of the fund's senior leadership. We believe that this should be based on the principles of fairness, transparency and merit. What do you make of that?
Well, one has to assess not just the general principle of which country it should come from, but also who could produce a credible leader. And leading the IMF, particularly at a time of global crisis, requires somebody with enormous experience of crises, very substantial economic weight and expertise, a great deal of credibility around the world. And the ideal candidate should clearly have these qualities: political weight as well as intellectual weight. I don't think this is a very, very long short list. In fact, the very few people come to mind. I don't know who the Chinese government might try to promote to this job. It's not immediately obvious to me which Chinese figure would fill those would fill those criteria, would meet those criteria. It seems to me quite likely that it would be from someone from somewhere else.
All right, let me wrap this up, Martin, by asking you what you make of the impact of the events of the last few weeks on the future of the IMF, an institution that many have seen, along with the World Bank, as increasingly irrelevant in the past few years, except for, let's say, last year onwards, where the IMF has definitely come into a prime role with regards to the sovereign debt rescue across Europe.
Well, obviously this is unbelievably damaging that the head of this institution should be involved in such a case. Of course, the institution as such isn't responsible, but the members chose the leader. I don't know what's going to happen with the case, but it is very damaging. I would have to say I disagree with your assessment. I think most informed people would think that the IMF has done remarkably well under Strauss-Kahn's leadership and has dealt with the crisis extremely